Hey everyone, adding this in at the start of the video since I kind of forgot to mention it before I just started rambling on about how much I love Final Fantasy VI, but this is going to be a video that contains spoilers, not directly discussing like, oh, and this thing happens and this is the narrative impact of it, but just mentioning things that I loved and how impactful they were for me as I played the game, and just as a result there will be spoilers in there, so be warned of that. If you're worried about spoilers for Final Fantasy VI, you want to play it for yourself, click away from the video now. Also, if you have enjoyed my Let's Play of Final Fantasy VI, whether it be the episodic format or the stream format once we switched over to that, and you enjoy my content in general, please do consider subscribing to the channel. I'm trying to grow, I'm trying to make YouTube my full-time career, and it's hard to do that nowadays, especially with YouTube pushing away from typical gaming Let's Play content. So if you enjoy what I do, that would mean the absolute world. It would help immensely. Thank you so much. Enjoy the video. Final Fantasy VI is a masterpiece. I'm sure most of y'all already knew that. Maybe a couple of you are as in the dark as I was, but the majority of people obviously are not new to this opinion. And really, I wasn't either. I knew for a fact that Final Fantasy VI was a masterpiece, just objectively. But I hadn't played it for myself. And now that I have, I can feel it when I say that Final Fantasy VI is a masterpiece. From its characters, both our heroes and our villains, the pacing of all the events that go on, the actual variety in events that happen, the incredible music, the wonderful storytelling, all the different little moments that occur in side missions or the main story itself between different characters, the sheer scale of the cast in general, and the fact that all of this took place originally on the Super Nintendo just blow me away. And I'm very happy that I've now played the game, and I'm very happy to be talking about it now, post-completion of the game, with you guys today. So let's talk about it. Hello everyone, my name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and yeah, if you didn't see, as of the recording of this video last night, I finished my Let's Play of Final Fantasy VI on stream. What started off as a normal episodic Let's Play before it kind of was proven to me that that sort of format is unfortunately dying, at least in the current landscape of YouTube, as much as I hate to see it go. I decided to switch it over to a stream format. Worked great. We beat the rest of the game, and man, there aren't many games that get me teary-eyed that I've played on the channel. There's a few, a few that have stood out. Things like Outer Wilds, Nier Automata, Hollow Knight a bit, things like that. But now I can officially count Final Fantasy VI amongst that list. And it's nice, man, it really is, because if you don't know, I started the channel as a kind of method to force myself to actually play classic games that I knew were good, that are kind of hallmarks of the entire pantheon of gaming, that I just never played and never could quite bring myself to play just in my own time. So I figured if I'm doing a Let's Play of something, I will hold myself to a schedule, upload videos regularly, and then I'll get to experience these games. And people will get someone who's never experienced them before, experiencing it for the first time and kind of reliving it through my eyes, right? And so we started with Chrono Trigger. The very first game I ever played on the channel was Chrono Trigger, another absolute titan in the past of JRPGs, again, considered by many to be the greatest JRPG of all time, and it was phenomenal. Then we went and played things like Hollow Knight, I've played the Nier series, Outer Wilds, older games, newer games, the Metroid series, all sorts of different stuff. And while we've kind of gotten away from that a little bit with the just barrage of new releases we've had, especially in the last year, that were games that I wanted to play, new Fire Emblem, new Armored Core, the release of Tactics Ogre Reborn, all this different stuff, Final Fantasy 16. It was so nice to get back to that classic old school style of game that everyone seemed to know but me, and being able to revel in your guys' excitement of seeing me experience all of your favorite moments while also experiencing them for the first time myself. And it's impressive because other than a couple things like Kefka being a prominent figure in the story and things like the Ghost Train and whatnot, I went in completely unspoiled about pretty much the majority of the game. I really only knew Terra and Kefka because of playing Final Fantasy Dissidia, and I mean the Ghost Train has been memed on for, the suplex and everything since I was a kid, so I've been aware of that in the overall landscape of Final Fantasy memes for a very, very long time. But the rest of it, I had no clue. Didn't know who the characters were, didn't know how the story was going to develop, and I was blown away. Absolutely, completely, and thoroughly. Just some of my favorite moments, just that I can think of off the top of my head. Locke's whole backstory with trying to save his best friend, his childhood sweetheart, however you want to view it, who died, quote-unquote, due to his actions and him trying to find this legendary treasure to save her and everything, and then being able to do so was incredibly powerful. Very, very strong moment. Celis with Cid, I really don't need to say more, but on the island, that I was not able to save him, but I feel like either way, such incredibly powerful moments. The opera, that whole segment, again with Celis, and just the song and the scenery and learning the lines and knowing to say them properly and racing to protect her from Ultros, and there's just so many good moments. Just Terra in the village with the kids and the teens who are having a baby, and her learning the importance of human emotion and love and how to feel those things. Even just the opening segment that everyone always talks about so much is one of their favorite set pieces in Final Fantasy, with Terra and the soldiers of the Empire marching on Narsh with their Magitech armor. Like, I had seen that before. I knew of it, but just as a way to start a game, absolutely blew my mind. The sheer impact of it was something that I don't think I'll forget for a very, very long time. And it goes to show that the artistic effort that goes into making games is not, maybe not completely constrained. It can be constrained, but not in any meaningful way constrained by the limitations of technology, right? The fact that something like this came out on the Super Nintendo in 1996, almost 30 years ago, and still has as much emotional punch in so many different ways. Joy, sadness, bittersweet happiness, all these different things. It goes to show the talent behind the game. The music, I mean, some of the catchiest, most earwormy songs in all of Final Fantasy, songs that I've known for a long time that I didn't even realize originated from Final Fantasy VI. The various battle themes, the various overworld themes, a lot of which are remixed versions of past iterations from different Final Fantasy games, but have just a certain life to them in 6 that is stunning. Of course, I was playing the Pixel Remaster version, so I don't know how much of an impact that has on certain things, like my appreciation of the graphics, my appreciation of the soundtrack. I don't know what was changed, really, from the OG version, but I don't know that it really matters either, seeing as how so many people who were in my chat and so many people just, when I was doing research on what version of the game I should play, that I saw online were saying, oh, the Pixel Remaster is phenomenal, it's excellent, it's a perfect remaster, absolutely play it. You don't have to play the original because the Pixel Remaster perfectly encompasses the soul of it. And man, you don't hear that very often, but I gotta agree, man, I gotta agree. The only nitpick that some really old Final Fantasy heads who know Final Fantasy VI, who grew up with it, played it when they were kids, whatever, say they didn't like the font in the Pixel Remaster version, but I mean, that didn't bother me in the slightest. I guess being someone who hasn't played the original, I couldn't see the difference, and it was perfectly functional for me. Did not bother me in the slightest. So for me, I mean, it's a perfect 10 out of 10. I don't typically give game ratings, but in terms of just things that I've played in the course of my life, Final Fantasy VI was pretty damn perfect, and that's impressive. That's very, very impressive. Things I was taken aback by, I was not prepared for the fact that there's really no set main character. Terra kind of edges out at the end, kind of as, your starting character, the character that has the strongest connection to the Espers and magic, and some of the most pivotal moments in the game do focus on her. The final confrontation with Kefka in the final dungeon, she's the primary character who's speaking, or at least she was for me. I don't know if that changes based on who's the main party lead. I think it was just her speaking, though. I'm pretty sure it had her name above the speech box. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But I mean, even after the final battle, it's like the big climactic moments with, oh, is Terra going to survive, yada, 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 all this different stuff focused on her. So she is ultimately the main character. I mean, she's the character that was the heroic representation for 6 in Dissidia, things like that. But she's the least main character out of probably all of the Final Fantasy protagonists that I've ever seen. There's so much love and care and attention that's given to all of the rest of the cast. Even characters like Umaro and Mog and Gogo, who are clearly optional side characters that you can just get for fun, still have their moments. And the rest of the cast are hugely pivotal. They all have a role to play. They all have their own dungeons or side stories, little missions and scenes that you can find. They have interactions in the story. It's really, really impressive. They all felt like such a cohesive unit by the end of the game. And of course, that's emphasized by the fact that you need to use almost the entire party to get through the final dungeon. But just, I was so impressed. And I was not expecting that going into it at all. I had it fixed in my mind that Terra was the main character, like she was the protagonist of this Final Fantasy, just like Cloud or Squall or Clive or whoever. Like, this is the protagonist, I'll be building a party around her, cool, go. Not how it played out. And it's kind of a nice mix of the very OG Final Fantasies where you just had a party and no one was really the main character, and like the more current gen Final Fantasies where you have a clear main character and then the party that revolves around them. I don't think we've seen a blending like that in any Final Fantasy game except maybe kind of 12. But even then, like, for better or for worse, Vaughn and Pinello are still kind of like the main protagonists, even though Balthier is obviously the protagonist, but you know, that's a story as old as time. So yeah, I was blown away by that. The fact that the midway point is Kefka getting the power of the Warring Triad, destroying the world, and having a whole new version of the world map to explore with whole new dungeons and the same towns, but revamped, destroyed, rebuilt, characters moved around, doing different things. Was not expecting that at all. The fact that you could potentially like lose Shadow forever, you have to actually save him and get him to join the team, only to then have him wind up staying behind and letting himself die out of some sort of guilty repentance for the death of his friend. So many moments that caught me off guard. And for a game as old as it is, and for someone like myself who's played so many games and has seen so many games and knows the tropes and expects story beats, I mean, you guys talk all the time about how you're amazed at the things that I predict and the theories that I come up with minimal information that wind up proving true. I was not able to predict a lot of what was going to happen in 6. And that's very, very cool. I'm impressed by that. Not to toot my own horn too much, but just, it's nice to have a game that keeps me guessing the whole time, especially when it's as old as it is. And then, you know, benefit of not being spoiled at all, obviously. But the combat was fun, snappy, entertaining. Like, apparently I was underleveled for 95% of the game, but it never felt like it. Like, things felt challenging, sure, but never in an unfair, oh, I'm doing something wrong kind of way. Just felt like this is a difficult Final Fantasy, and I loved that. I had to be on top of my actual timing for when I was going to do certain attacks and actions. I had to pay attention to when characters would take a big hit, make sure I had an action available to try and heal them, quickly navigate through menus with skill and accuracy to trigger the things that I needed to trigger in the timeline that I needed to trigger them, lest the enemy get another attack in before I could. It felt good, man. It felt really, really good. And then on the flip side, when I did a bunch of grinding in preparation for Kefka's Tower, because people in the community were telling me, like, you really got to grind, you got to get prepared, it's going to be tough. Like, yeah, the game got really easy because I just Ultima spammed my way up through the entire dungeon until I got to the final boss, which proved a little bit more of a challenge, but it still was fun and satisfying. It felt like I had earned that reward. I've spent my time exploring the game world. I gathered the Espers, I trained, learned, communed with them, earned the right to use their magic, which is such a core part of what the story of Final Fantasy VI is. And then I was able to go and I was able to seize victory in the face of someone who did not earn their power, who took it unrightfully, unlawfully, to the detriment of everyone and everything around them. And we were able to come out on top, despite him being a godly, incredible being. And man, like, I gotta talk about that fight with Kefka, right? Like, the Tower of the Gods, the statues of the gods, this Michelangelo-esque amalgamate Cthulhu being was insane. The 4-part OST with each phase of the fight having a different version of the soundtrack for the final boss fight, bringing in the main motif, the main menu theme of the game when Kefka's final form descended from the clouds to fight us, like God himself coming down to smite the interlopers who would encroach upon his heaven after climbing the Tower of Babel. Dude. I can't even imagine doing that as a kid, an impressionable young 12-year-old or whatever I would have been. I mean, I would have been 4 when the game came out, but I probably wouldn't have played it until much later. Either way, I can't even imagine, and I can completely understand why it had the impact on you guys who did play it when you were kids, that it did. Because, wow. It does, people were saying that there's nothing else like it in Final Fantasy. I don't necessarily agree with that. I was immediately reminded of the final battle with Ultimacia in Final Fantasy VIII, which is my personal favorite Final Fantasy. It's the game that I grew up with. A lot of people might be offended that I would compare Final Fantasy VI and Kefka and his dungeon to Final Fantasy VIII and Ultimacia and her dungeon, but I really do see a lot of the same similarities there. The twisted, mashed together nature of it, fighting a bunch of mini bosses as you go throughout, some of which you've already seen before, having to navigate with multiple parties, having the final boss potentially eradicating characters from time and the battle and having to swap in other characters, and as such needing to have your whole party up and ready to go. There's a lot of similarities there that I don't think really existed in Final Fantasy VII, and I can only imagine that they were drawing on the influence of Final Fantasy VI when they did 8. And that vindicates me a little bit, because this kind of segues into the last thing that I want to talk about, other than just continuing to gush about the game, which like I could just do for hours if I wanted to. But you can watch the VOD of me finishing the game and talking about it with chat afterwards if you want to see more of that. That link will be in the description. But for me, as much as I can absolutely acknowledge the fact that Final Fantasy VI is a masterpiece, and very well might be, well, very well is, no might be here, is one of the greatest Final Fantasy games of all time, and I can totally understand the people who say that it's the best of all time. Don't necessarily agree with that, but it's absolutely up there for sure. It's vindicating to know that there are definitely, just from looking at it, some influences of 6 in 8, because I love 8. Like I said, 8 is my absolute favorite. It's the very first Final Fantasy game that I played outside of Tactics. It's one of the primary influences on me from when I was growing up, and I adore it. I think it's phenomenal. I think it gets way too much hate, and while I can acknowledge the fact that it is probably an inferior game to FF6, especially because it's not as tightly knit of an experience overall, to me, a game being perfect doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be my favorite, right? But I can see the through line. Just like we can see the influence of Kefka in Sephiroth in Final Fantasy VII, right? I can see that influence of Final Fantasy VI in Final Fantasy VIII with the way its world map is, the way its party is, the way its final dungeon is. And it's awesome. It's just, I'm so happy to have another game in the series under my belt, finally. If you don't know, I've played 1, 2, and 3, the majority of 4, now 6, part of the original 7, 8, and then I kind of taper off. I've missed 10, I don't count the MMOs, so 11. Part of 12, I bounced off 12 when I was younger. I want to go back to it. Part of 13, which I just bounced off of and have no interest in going back to. Again, 14, I don't count. 15, I loved. 16, I loved. So at this point, I've got the majority of the series under my belt, and as I play some of these classic games and see the influence that they have on other later games in the series, it's so satisfying. It's just knowing where this series has come from and what it has done in the past and how it continues to innovate on itself while drawing inspiration from its past. There's not a lot of other stuff that does that successfully for as long as Final Fantasy has been doing it. And it just cements for me that Final Fantasy is one of my favorite gaming series of all time. Up there with things like Fire Emblem and Mass Effect and Halo and all that type of stuff. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Final Fantasy VI. Man, absolutely phenomenal. Like I said, complete masterpiece. I adored every second of it. If you haven't played it, I highly, highly recommend that you go and check it out. It's 100% worth your time, unless you're just someone who is not a fan of, old school classic style turn-based JRPGs, or, you're younger and you don't have like any sort of nostalgia for that sort of SNES era of games. It's just not something that interests you. Fair enough. But at the very least, check out a Let's Play of it. Watch mine. Watch someone else's. If you don't feel like playing it yourself, still try to experience it, because I think there's still something there that you'll get out of it. That said, I'm going to wrap this one up here, lest I just continue to ramble on about the game forever. Thank you so much for watching. My name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there. And remember, be good to each other. Bye now.